I'm live. Good morning. Whoa, sorry, I'm very live. I'm Nina Stack. I'm president of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this spring colloquium, a conversation on the social sector in the 21st century. It is a real treat to be on the stage of one of our state's and our country's finest professional theaters. The Council's membership has become familiar with my attempts to often incorporate an arts aspect into our programs. In light of our full agenda, I'm thrilled to be spotlighting the arts by having us here at George Street Playhouse, which is part of a magnificent cultural center, which is going to be even more magnificent. I think there are lots of capital plans going on, that is in the heart of a city that has been completely reborn by the arts. The good news is that I'm not going to reprise my monologue from the Glass Menagerie audition in college. I want to first bring you the greetings of our board chair, David Grant, who's president of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation. There are very few things that would have kept David from being with us today, but I'm afraid we ran up against one of them with scheduling. He is, as we speak, proudly enjoying his son Rob's graduation celebration from Princeton University. Well, I couldn't argue with that one. In recent years, the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers has taken an increasingly expansive approach to its programming and initiatives, highlighting opportunities for our members and others to leverage their investments to have greater impact. This expansion is taking shape in a variety of forms, and today's program is one important step in this direction, both in terms of content as well as audience. Members will recall last year at our conference, we were joined by a few nonprofit leaders to help inform the specific issue-oriented discussions that were taking place. Afterwards, members told us what a difference it made having nonprofit leaders there. So we listened, and I'm happy to report that today, New Jersey's entire social sector, funders and nonprofits, were invited and are very well represented. I want to thank Anne-Marie Palaio and the trustees of the Fred C. Rummel Foundation for providing a grant to help underwrite the nonprofit registration costs. Another illustration of this expansion is evident in a major initiative that the Council has undertaken in recent months. At our board retreat last year, David Grant shared a vision of what might be accomplished if foundations worked together as a field to address a critical issue facing the state. After several months of discussion and deliberation among the board and with the members at large, the Council has launched New Jersey Together, a working group chaired by Abby O'Neill of the Union Foundation and Hans Decker of the Community Foundation of New Jersey, has been meeting for some time to determine how this bold collaborative endeavor will take shape. The intent is to bring all the resources in the philanthropic toolbox, expertise, best practices, attention, money, and much more, all the tools to bear on a significant challenge. Based on the choices of the membership, the pilot effort for New Jersey Together will focus on crime prevention, leveraging the work being done as part of Governor Corzine's Safe Streets and Neighborhoods initiative. We are hoping many grant makers will play a role in New Jersey Together. If you would like to be more involved in the planning phase, please let Abby, Hans, or myself know, and we'll be very happy to speak more with you about it. I wanted to call attention to this initiative now because the process it has challenged our members to go through, to consider breaking out of funding silos, to recognize the connections between issues that might not seem obvious at first glance. It's especially relevant to the discussion we're having today. Of course, our program today would not be possible without the support of several key sponsors. First, let me thank and acknowledge PSE&G, our signature sponsor, whose motto, "We make things work for you," is certainly true for many New Jersey nonprofits. I want to thank our breakfast and networking sponsor, Provident Bank Foundation in Kendall, Warsaw, and our luncheon and group discussion sponsor, Alcatel-Lucent, as well as Santa Fe Avantis, our gift sponsor, which you'll receive a bit later. I hope many of you also had the opportunity to meet some of our vendors in our resource marketplace. They'll be there during lunch as well, so if you didn't have a chance to stop by, and the air conditioning is working now, I hope you'll do so. Finally, I want to acknowledge the Council's dynamic board, and specifically the Program Committee, which played a leading role in shaping the themes for today's event. Chaired last year by Abby O'Neill, and this year by Michael Catania and John Smith, the committee provides valuable guidance in determining the range as well as the focus of our programs, finding just the right balance between issue-oriented offerings and skill-building classes. The premise for today's program is this: if business was the primary driver of social change in the 1800s and government in the 1900s, many believe the 21st century's change agent will be the social sector, the nonprofits and the philanthropies that support them and encourage them and nurture them. Numbers tell much of this. In addition to bridging all differences, whether faith, education, race, gender, class, and addressing every imaginable issue, the social sector is growing at a simply astounding rate. According to the Institute for Policy Study at Johns Hopkins University, employment growth in nonprofits is outpacing overall employment growth in 46 of 50 states, larger than utilities, wholesale trade, and construction industries put together. While the number of new foundations being formed has slowed somewhat in the past couple of years, the rate is still growing, and giving continues to rise, more than 10% in 2007. There has also been tremendous growth in individual giving and in the number of non-traditional philanthropic structures, such as giving circles, which have more than doubled in the past 2 years to at least 400 nationwide. The sheer explosion of activity within and surrounding our sector appears to illustrate that we are indeed in a golden age of philanthropy. Just last month, I joined many of you at the very first Philanthropy Summit, the largest global convening ever for the philanthropic community. As we gather here today, the National Nonprofit Summit is taking place in Washington. This kind of national global convening of the quiet or soft sector is unprecedented. A recent article in the Weekly Standard posed a loaded question. The nonprofit industrial complex: is there such a thing as too much civil society? Much like industrialization, the service sector, and big government have transformed our society, the article predicts, the social sector could leave an equally lasting mark. Quoting from the piece, "The growth of nonprofits has created the world's largest sector that is neither business fish nor government fowl. It has the private sector's diversity and independence, but the government's lack of profit motive. It is a different way of doing business. It may be a different way to making a country." Interestingly, Newt Gingrich was one of the speakers at the summit last month, and he spoke of the social sector as, quote, "the force that moves society." The great gift that America can bring to the world is its contribution of a civil society. He said, "The creation and organization of nonprofits, where you have the ability to focus on what you believe in without the obligation to make a profit and bring innovation, ideas, and true creativity outside of the bureaucracy of government." Regardless of which side of the aisle you sit, the Weekly Standard and Mr. Gingrich have it right on this. The sector has the potential for tremendous influence, and it is a sector about innovation and change. Foundations and nonprofits have a shared vision of doing more and doing it better. But we all know we also have to be prepared to respond to the consequences of our sector's growth. Together, thanks to conversations like the one we are about to hear, we are beginning to define what we might be able to accomplish. As you know, we have 3 exceptional guests with us today. This is quite a dynamic trio. Interestingly, 2 alumni of Columbia University's Teachers College. So, We'll get them to the stage. Their bios are in the program booklet, and I encourage you to read them. If you work in the social sector, there's little chance that you haven't benefited from the Foundation Center, either as the go-to resource for information on specific foundations and grant writing, or in its role as a leading research center and observer of issues and trends that shape our field. We are delighted to have its president, Sarah Engelhardt, here to moderate our discussion. Sarah, would you come up and take your seat, please? Thank you. Recently, Sarah announced that she'll be leaving the Foundation Center after more than 20 years, so this is a tremendous opportunity for us to take advantage of some of the insights she's gained during her tenure there. Globalization, philanthrocapitalism, social entrepreneurialism. Okay, say those 3 trends fast, 3 times. Seriously, though, few people are chronicling these trends as diligently as Matthew Bishop of The Economist. Matthew, would you come up and take your seat, please? I had the pleasure of getting a sneak peek at Matthew during the Philanthropy Summit last month. He brings a fascinating perspective on where our sector has been, long before there was even a sector, and where it could be headed. I believe he will provide an engaging complement to our special guest, Governor Thomas H. Kean. Governor. While the governor's bio summarizes the remarkable leadership roles he has played in our state, it does not do justice to the meaningful changes his leadership has created. I had the great fortune to work in the Kean administration, getting a front row seat on just one of the ways in which he transformed life in New Jersey, his quiet revolution of the arts. Governor Kean fostered a great sense of pride in this state while governor, and with every new role he takes on, whether leading the 9/11 Commission or chairing the country's largest foundation devoted to improving the health and health care of all Americans, he continues to make us proud to be from his state. Governor, thank you for joining us. I'll now turn us over to Sarah's very capable hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Well, I feel greatly honored to have been asked to moderate this conversation between 2 such very distinguished guests. And the stage has been nicely set, I think, by Nina's excellent introductions. Having been a student of the foundation field since I first went to work for Carnegie Corporation in June 1964, I've had a front row seat for many of the historic changes of the 20th century. And now I find myself not just in the front row, but on the stage for this excellent colloquium about the tremendous opportunities and challenges for the 21st century. Governor Kean, I wonder if you would start the conversation off by describing the key levers that you see for foundations to be significant agents of change in the 21st century. And I'm thinking here less in terms of the specific issues they might work on, but more in terms of their operating styles and their relationships to other sectors in the society.
Well, foundations have got to can do some things that probably nobody else can do. First of all, as we said, there's no profit motive. And occasionally, having been involved with some corporations, as much as they want to be philanthropic, and many of them are, there is always, what is this going to do for us? And that has to be part of the equation. Government's got its own problems. Government can do a lot of good things, but it's subject to the vagaries of the budget process and changing administrations, changing parties, what have you. Foundations can be levers of change because they don't have either of those problems. And they also have an ability to be innovative. They can take risks, and should take risks, frankly, because they have the ability to do so. And one thing about foundations, they can fail and go on and learn from those failures. very hard for other sectors to do that. So they have a lot of ability to get into some areas that and make an impact and change, and often do some things which can be replicated. You do it small, then it gets larger, and 911, which, you know, all of us think 911 is very, you know, we just use it. Well, there needs to be any 911 until Robert Wood Johnson. Robert Wood Johnson got people together, saw the need, and were able to establish a system that all of us use all over the country right now, and it saves lives. Without that convening thing that the foundation did, we perhaps wouldn't have it today. And I can give you other examples from Carnegie and from a number of other foundations as well, similar things.
Do you think that they do enough to use these particular qualities that they have to do their work? I guess I'm thinking about some of the challenges that have been made to foundations, that they aren't failing enough.
Well,
they're not taking enough risks.
That's an interesting question. I suspect that's right. And it's hard to take risks. And once you've taken risks, it's even harder to admit failure. It's very hard for the staff. I mean, but these foundations have wonderful, wonderful, dedicated people who could be in any number of other fields. They work for foundations because they love to do it. And they get all invested in a program. I mean, they're trying to make change, and they invest in something, and it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And for the staff then to sort of go to the board and say, hey, you know, you invested $10 million, and guess what? You know, it didn't get anything out of it. It failed. But that's important to take those risks. You're a foundation. It's important to fail, and it's important to learn from those failures, and then to be not only to learn inside the foundation, but perhaps publicize it. You know, one of those interesting things Carnegie did was, you know, we have a publication, and probably the most asked for publications. We failed with a program in Zimbabwe. And we had, I don't remember what the article is called, something to the effect of Anatomy of a Failure. We published it. It was probably the most read issue of our magazine. I mean, people were very interested in why we failed and the fact we were admitting it.
Yeah. Well, that I think is an important observation there. Mr. Bishop, what about your view of the foundation giving styles or opportunities for working with government, business, the media, not to mention each other, that will give organized philanthropy that extra oomph in the foreseeable future, the extra clout?
Well, I mean, as you know, I'm publishing a book in September, which is really making the case that we are potentially on the edge of a golden age of philanthropy, but that it's only potentially the case. I think that for precisely the reasons that the governor was saying, there's tremendous opportunity in theory for existing foundations and for the whole army of people who are coming into the sector because they've made money, whether here in America or around the world, during the last few years, and now want to put that money back. There's tremendous opportunity in theory, but the real question is going to be, you know, will people really do the hard work, do the hard risk-taking, actually be willing to fail, that will be necessary for this golden age to actually come to pass. I actually think it's really important that this opportunity is taken, because I don't see in government or in business or indeed in traditional charities where there still has to be this tremendous preoccupation with fundraising all the time that kind of stops you being long-term as you'd like to be. Unless the philanthropic sector really rises up to this challenge, then there's going to be a failure to develop really good answers to some of the big problems that society is facing. So it's a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous responsibility on the sector to be willing to actually find those areas where risk-taking by people who haven't got those short-term pressures or profit motives or the need to get re-elected constraining them, you know, can actually come to pass. But I am quite optimistic. I mean, I'm struck by, I met Cory Booker recently. He's now got an officer in City Hall whose responsibility is to coordinate philanthropic efforts to fund risky policy initiatives in the area, the same as Michael Bloomberg has done in New York. And so it seems that some of the more enlightened politicians are beginning to realize that there is an opportunity to work with philanthropists, and the philanthropists are coming in and being willing to try and fund some of the more interesting initiatives. And I'm very excited by this Jersey Together initiative that you're talking about, which seems to fit also into this mold of trying to figure out how to find a niche where you can really come together with a lot of resource and make a huge difference.
It's very important because, I hate to say this, but government's failing. If you take the most serious problems affecting this society, and I don't care if you take it in our own state of New Jersey or you take it nationally, if you think of the most serious problems we have internally in the country, forgetting about foreign policy, we're not addressing them. We're simply not addressing them. Government is backing away or putting them off or feels they don't have the money to do them, whatever it is. Government isn't addressing those problems. On the other hand, we can't allow government to step back and say, we don't have the responsibility, let the foundations do it. I think President Bush's 1,000 Points of Light was a wonderful image and a wonderful thing, and it stimulated, I think, a lot of people to get more involved in charity, and still is, in giving. But that can't be taken the next step, which is to say, let's not spend this in government. Let the private sector do it. Private sector can help government. It can be innovative where government can't be. It can supplement things, but it should never take the place in solving the society's most important problems.
When I was very struck, I interviewed Bill Gates for the book, and it was very clear in researching the interview that lots of people in the public health field feel that the Gates Foundation is this huge monster that's changing policy in all sorts of ways that people feel uncomfortable about. But then you talk to Gates himself, and he's preoccupied by how small his resources are compared to any of the governments that he's dealing with or the multilateral organizations. And so, I think you're absolutely right that it's about finding ways to where you can make a big difference with a relatively small amount of money compared to the resources at government's disposal, and maybe use that successful experimentation to put pressure on government or to lead by example so that government has no choice but to kind of scale up these successful innovations to a meaningful scale.
Well, now you've written and talked and alluded to it here, that this new golden age of philanthropy is being driven, in your view, as I understand it, by the characteristics of some of the new philanthropists. In addition to the sheer size of their giving potential, which has happened only a few times in our past history, where we would have that level of resources available in the philanthropic sector. It also can create the environment for the phenomenon of allowing wealth to benefit the society. Governor Kane, you're a trustee of two of the country's oldest foundations. They're not supported by the new philanthropists, but they have a very distinguished history. Both of the foundations that you've worked with have recently announced major shifts in how they're spending their money and where their giving is going. Carnegie Corporation was created in the first golden age of philanthropy, and its founder is still very much revered today by those same new philanthropists who saw his way of doing philanthropy being very much the way they want to do it as well. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation really came of age in the 1970s with a very different vision for what it was going to do. In both institutions, the trustees are the keepers of the flame. So give us a sense of how the trustees in those organizations or in others you might know of, long after the original donor is deceased, can still balance the wishes of the donor against the need to keep the foundation relevant to the current social environment. Share with us the conversations at the board tables where some of these decisions got made and what influenced it.
Well, first of all, both the foundations you mentioned, Carnegie and Robert Wood Johnson, are extraordinarily fortunate in their founders. I mean, Andrew Carnegie basically said the most important things in his lifetime he thought we ought to be dealing with is education, because it meant the future, and world peace. But within that framework, he left the trustees who would succeed him total flexibility. He didn't try to bind our hands in any way at all. So we are always talking. We've got an enormously active and engaged board at Carnegie, and we spend 90% of our time talking about mission, philosophy, and ways in which we can make grants more successful, and only 10% of administrative or what have you. And he left us that legacy. So we can change with the times. And we can, and the same thing, by the way, at Robert Wood Johnson. General Johnson was an extraordinarily charitable man himself, particularly in this particular area. And stories of him, during the Depression, somebody said once, if you don't stop him, he's going to give away all his money, because he just felt the need so strongly. But he set very loose guidelines, because he also recognized this world changes, and you've got to give the trustees flexibility. Now, the problem that some of you may have in that regard is that the founders or people who are setting up the foundations or what have you may not have been so flexible. And you've got to be careful of that. There's a suit pending in New Jersey now against Princeton University that says it has not used the resources that were left for the Woodrow Wilson School by that family as was intended. And therefore, Princeton should give them back. And it's a seminal suit. I think everybody's watching, and universities are watching in particular. But foundations got to watch it too, and find out what guidelines are going to be laid out in that regard. I can't comment any further because Billy Tillman put me in a board of the foundation. So I'm involved in a court case, I guess, at this point. But that's something everybody's got to watch, and it's coming up in court this fall. That's very, very important. But we continually, at both Robert Wood Johnson and Carnegie, go over our missions. In both cases, you say, we've changed, even recently. So that we have an impact philosophy at Robert Wood Johnson that makes us look differently at our grants and our grant postures. And Carnegie has reorganized the whole thing to put everybody in the foundation, including the person who's out of investments, is now involved in somewhere in the grant-making process. And we've got two heads, one international and one national, and we're looking together at a different way at grants and looking at failures as well as successes.
And you're saying that a lot of this is of the founders, but I think many other foundations are also making changes. And I guess I'd turn to Matthew Bishop, because I think one might believe from reading what you talk about, the new philanthropists, that the results they're getting by doing things differently could be what is driving the older foundations to begin to match them with some of the strategies. Or is it that the current climate, I mean, you've mentioned the vast difference between the wealthy and the poor and the increasing gap there. And is that perhaps really just an indicator that we're now in a point where the foundations have to give differently and have to behave differently? Climate is so different.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have a slightly roundabout answer to that question. Because you mentioned that Carnegie was the first golden age. But actually, one of the things I've done with the book is to try and look back to the start of capitalism and Middle Ages in Europe, and actually look at successive waves of innovation and wealth creation. And it turns out that each time there was a huge increase in wealth creation, largely because of various social trends that were changing society. At the same time, the winners in that period became philanthropists, and they started to do philanthropy in ways that reflected some of the innovations of the business sector of the day. So back in Tudor England, when you had the first merchant classes starting to build companies for the first time, they found the idea of this religious institution called the trust, charitable trust, and they started to think, well, let's endow a charitable trust for the first time. And this is what Rockefeller and Carnegie reinvented on a grander scale at the start of the 20th century. In the 18th century, when you had the joint stock company invented for the first time, you had this thing called joint stock philanthropy, where people actually, you got 100 people to subscribe to a charity for the first time in the same way that they bought shares in companies for the first time. And so you get these waves of innovation. And I think what's happening now is that the last 25 years have probably been the most productive period in the history of capitalism. And there have been all sorts of amazing innovations in the way people have gone about business that's made that wealth creation possible. And you're starting to see that affect both the winners from that wealth creation wave, who are able to who are starting to give away their money and are just naturally doing it in ways that reflect how they've done business. And you're also seeing it reflect the general climate, which is what I think is starting to drive a lot of change in established foundations. Just to pick a few examples, I mean, one issue is transparency, which has clearly become one of the drivers of the for-profit world. Has been this much greater data availability, much greater scrutiny of performance of institutions in the corporate world. You're now seeing that transfer to government and, crucially, to the non-profit sector. A bit more slowly than I'd like to see, actually, but it's starting to happen. And it's just taken as norm in business that your performance is going to be routinely scrutinized and analyzed, and you're going to be held to account for performance. That's moving more generally. Globalization is another area which has clearly driven wealth creation in business. And so you're seeing, I think, the new foundations increasingly looking at problem solving from a global perspective, whether it be climate change or public health in the biggest foundations, or poverty issues. And you're also seeing wealth created in parts of the world where there wasn't wealth creation before and there was no culture of philanthropy. And you're seeing philanthropists emerge for the first time, really starting to give back to their own societies. And then you see things like networks and cooperation, which is very much part of the language co-opetition in business, where people both see each other as rivals but also as potential collaborators. And so you're starting to see that effect coming into play in philanthropy as well, with, I guess, the example here in New Jersey, again, of what people who may have traditionally not thought about cooperating with each other now coming together, but still probably wanting to retain, I suspect, their own individual autonomy. So I think these forces are affecting everybody, even though it's characterized as a new philanthropist versus old philanthropist model.
Forces are there, and has it been more or less cyclical in your view? Similar kinds of forces come into play and philanthropy behaves in a certain way. More people are philanthropic.
Yeah, I think what's been interesting is that I guess the people who make the money out of that group, some of those people, not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, some of those people are the more enlightened people, and they really understand that because they tend to think about things systematically, and they're problem solvers, and so they look at what else is going on in society and they start to give back and try and innovative ways of doing it. And some of those things work and some of those things don't work. In each of the previous golden ages, some of those things that they've innovated have been taken up by the business sector. Some of those things have remained philanthropic activities. Others of those things proved inadequate or only good up to a point, and so the government ended up taking over. And I think each previous era, each previous golden age has ended with the government bigger. Even in America, you look at the 1930s, when the Depression happened, Hoover's response was to organize a national philanthropic effort to try and forestall the worst effects of the Depression. It was woefully inadequate, and you had FDR elected and brought in the New Deal, which, I think was, even though it's not as far as a European welfare state, is still a far bigger welfare state than anyone in America had conceived of in the 1920s. And so each previous period, the state has expanded. The interesting thing today is, I think, as the governor was just saying, I think the state may be running up against its limits, certainly in terms of the appetite to take on new responsibilities and the ability to address some of these international cross-border issues that are really threatening the world, like climate change and sort of terrorism or whatever. And therefore, it may actually be that this golden age requires philanthropists in the private sector to find answers that aren't going to be able to be taken on by the state, but may need to be remain private. So it's a very different period, I think, in that sense.
three things are really occurring. One is, I think government is less and less willing to take on the problems that all of us see out there. Secondly is the business sector is pulling back. Some of the business sector, and some of them still are, but less and less of them, are extremely charitable out of corporate funds, and the boards of directors have encouraged that. That's being pulled back now. That due to, I guess, stockholder activism, and I don't know if Sarbanes-Oxley or whatever, all these new things affecting business means that some businesses feel they just cannot afford anymore to be as charitable as they once were, so they're still charitable maybe in and around their corporate headquarters. But the broad charitable efforts that they used to do just simply aren't happening anymore.
I'll make one exception to that trend, which I think particularly for the very biggest multinational companies, I think there's a sense in which they have become somewhat more enlightened when they're operating in developing countries which don't have the kind of rule of law and the sort of standards that are expected of good behavior that you see in places like America and the rich world, where I think they've realized that they have to increasingly set higher standards of, say, supply chain, labor conditions, or environmental behavior. And you're seeing them starting to embrace a particular cause that's very close to their core strategy. And they will justify this, I think, in terms of their long-term profitability, but it is actually changing the way they behave in a way that's more constructive than they would have conceived of in the 1990s when it was all just short-term profits and so forth.
Absolutely right, but the key sentence is they've got to justify it in terms of their long-term profitability. And if they can't do that before stockholders and so on, they get in trouble. The other trend that's happening now is people in the last 10 years or so have made obscene amounts of wealth. And people are appalled when they read the newspapers about some of the highest of the corporate salaries, what the people in some of these hedge funds are making at a very young age in some cases, and what some of the people are doing with it. As you have these huge mega mansions built and uses, very selfish uses of wealth, which are very apparent to everybody else, and I think are creating a climate in the country now which says basically in some cases, you know, let's take it away. I mean, they're not using it properly. So that's another, to me, another incentive, I hope, for people who have made $1 billion, you know, at a very young age, to think, I owe society some of that. Not necessarily Andrew Carnegie's point of view, which is I owe all of it back to society. It's not mine, it's theirs. They lent it to me and now I'm going to give it back. But at least a large portion of it should go back into the public welfare in some way or another.
Well, 100 years ago, when Carnegie and Rockefeller and some of the early big general purpose philanthropies, large ones, were set up, they actually set up some of the infrastructure of the country in a way that the libraries, the public health systems, things that we assume only governments can do or big enough to do. And I think one of the issues I wonder about, you talk about the 20th century having been the government's leverage to make change, and if this current century is the one where the social sector will make the change, I'm not sure the wealth that businesses is creating can be the source of that change. I think it can be the philanthropy, as you're expressing, but it has to be in partnership with the government, because government is now vastly bigger than the wealth. If you compare just the balance of Carnegie's money, the wealth in the country at that time, as I recall, the assets of Carnegie equaled annual spending in all of higher education, so that he could build universities, he could create a whole educational infrastructure that hadn't existed before. So I guess I don't see how we can give up on government, and I see a lot of the very interesting things, including the New Jersey partnership
No, I would never suggest giving up on government. What I'm
But
saying is,
how do you see the influence taking place,
I
I
think
guess?
government now is timid, much more partisan than I've seen it in my lifetime. And there are all sorts of factors which prevent it from being proactive on difficult issues.
Yes.
And I think where the foundation, because of the foundation's willingness to promote change, or the feeling that you must get involved in some areas because nobody else is dealing with them, and then if they can partner with government, but not the other way around. Not government sort of trying to co-opt the foundation world. That would make me very, very nervous, because the foundation has got to me, I think, much more proactive than government, much more ambitious, much more innovative, and if government wants to come along and can help in that area, fine, but that's the way it ought to be, not the other way around.
But then the wealth is private wealth, and it seems very undemocratic. And I think we've gotten in trouble with that before, having the wealthy people in charge of the money that, even when it's used philanthropically, is often charged with self-dealing in some ways that can be very difficult for the field. And I think some of the government examinations of how philanthropy is being done comes out of that basic mistrust of private money, even if it's been put in presumably public institutions.
Well, no, you're absolutely right, and that's why we've got to be totally open, and that's why we've got to be transparent. That's why everybody's got to know at all the times what we're doing, so that and self-dealing should be condemned in this area as it would be condemned in government or any other place.
Yes.
Self-dealing cannot exist, and my worry is, frankly, that so many people here are doing such wonderful things, but there are so many foundations being created. There are a couple of small foundations somewhere that are going to do some things that are just plain wrong, and everybody knows they're wrong. And Congress is then going to hold hearings, and they're going to say, look what they did, and use that as some justification for putting some more restrictions or something on the foundation world that would affect much of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to be totally opaque. Not opaque, no, it's the other way around. Other way around. Not opaque at all, but totally transparent in what we do. And I think we've got to be very open with government. And I think we've got to be very open in what we're doing. I know at both Carnegie and Robert Wood Johnson, we interact quite often with members of the Senate, members of the House. We let them know what we're doing. We bring them in on what we're doing.
But
Risa and
you're
I make trips around Washington
Yes.
to tell the members of the Congress what we're doing, so they know. And if that event that I mentioned happens and foundations are brought into question, that the congressmen already know what good work some of the foundations are doing and how those work, by the way, are benefiting people in their own districts.
Yes, and foundations have been challenged to show that. Well, the Tax Reform Act of '69 was another example where legislation was passed where foundations were being charged with egregious things, most of which weren't true, but some legislation was put in place, so those things are no longer legal. The problem is the government is not willing to enforce the rules. They aren't spending any money on regulating foundations, and it opens it up for people who are breaking the rules, often, in many cases, not intentionally. And that if one of those becomes a scandal, the foundations are charged with why can't you make self-regulation? Why can't you manage the field? But I don't think they can do that.
No, and there's so many foundations being created. There's going to be a problem. I mean, there are going to be people, like there would in any other sector. I mean, there's not a sector involved that hasn't got millions of people in it who somebody's not going to do something wrong, either willfully or by mistake. But the rest of us have got to do it right, and we've got to be so transparent and so forthright, and we've got to let the people in government know exactly what we're doing. They're not going to agree with everything, you know. There may be, in the case of some of the foundations, there may be people politically who think, gee, we don't think the foundations ought to be in this field or ought to be doing this. But that's all right. as long as we're doing it legally and we're fitting a need as we see it for our foundation. And by the way, one of the things that, we're talking now about the Robert Wood Johnsons and the Carnegies and people like that who have huge endowments and can do things together which hopefully can change major things in this country for the better. Just as important to the smaller foundations. I mean, if there's a foundation here that is keeping a small community theater alive by their contributions, that's terrific. If somebody is creating scholarships for kids who wouldn't have scholarships in any other way, they may be changing the world too. And I mean, so we can't, in these discussions about what these major foundations are going to do one way or another, we can't ignore there are there are a million flowers blooming around here, and they're each making a difference.
I agree with you, though. That, I mean, I think for the bigger foundations in particular, they are going to be the subject of growing political scrutiny as they take on this bigger and bigger role. And I think it therefore will, it must be in the enlightened self-interest of those big foundations to really come out from hiding and to engage the public in this rather difficult debate about, what is the proper role of large lumps of private money in solving social problems. Because if the case isn't made and widely understood, then when there is some scandal, I mean, some populist politician is going to cause a fuss, and you'll suddenly have the equivalent of Sarbanes-Oxley passed, and with the same kind of unhelpful consequences.
It's already happening. I mean, not happening. There's nothing's being passed, but I can tell you the names of certain members of Congress right now who, if you talk to them, will tell you that the foundations have a huge pot of money that is tax exempt, and therefore the government's not getting anything out of it, and that are performing in ways that are unaccountable. And therefore, they believe, the small group are already in Congress, believes right now there should be regulations. There have been proposals made that you should take the 5% and raise that way up to an extent where some of us believe you'd eventually spin foundations out. There are people in Congress who believe that now, not the majority, but they believe that now. And so what we've got to do in the foundation world is make sure everybody else understands what we're doing, the good we're doing for society, the place we have in it, and that we can work along with them to help some of the ends that the Congress would like to achieve, but frankly can't do with the current constipation of government.
Well, it does seem to me that foundations have done a really terrific job. Many of them have very serious communications departments that are working to convince the public, as well as the people in Congress who are making the governmental decisions, making the laws, that foundations are doing good work. They're publicizing them. They're talking a great deal now about their effectiveness in achieving goals. It seems to me that there could be some problems in that. One is foundations trying to show to the world that they're always being effective really runs against the grain of being the innovative, make the failures and learn from them. I think there's a sense that the people don't want that. They want everything to be a success. So I think that fuels some of the difficulty of making decisions that might turn out to be bad. I think it even makes it worse for foundations to pool their money and try to do something really big, because there's even a greater hazard to failure then. So there's the question of whether the public has a tolerance for some of the kinds of experimentation that we rely on foundations to do. That's in a way their role for our society. And on the other side, it's not clear to me that the governmental or the people who are looking at that pot of money and wondering if they shouldn't direct where it goes more, they don't really care whether foundations are effective in doing what they decided they want to do. They care about whether it's going to their constituencies, whether it's going to the needs they see. Who's getting the money? Who's benefiting from the money? Is it the same wealthy institutions that keep the divisions in the society so great that the government has to step in and adjust some of that with scholarships, or philanthropy has to step in? So how do foundations in this current climate,
But I
really
mean-
take that on.
I think there are a couple of thoughts that occur to me, and one is you need the leaders of the very biggest foundations who are able to, be above any real political pressure. I mean, you need the Bill Gateses, you need Robert Wood Johnsons to actually take the lead in talking about failures, because they have a sufficiently good record of success that they can talk about their failures without people seriously thinking that as an institution they're wasting all the money that they're spending. And so you need them to take the lead in educating the public that actually this risk-taking, innovative role is the great thing that foundations can bring and philanthropy can bring to the game. The other is, I think you need to look at, you need to get some kind of model of how social consensus is built around particular institutions. And I think that you look at the academic work that's been done on philanthropy and its role, and it's tiny. I mean, I'm writing this book partly because I just couldn't believe how little had been written aimed at any kind of general audience about philanthropy. So there was Joel Fleischman's book came out last year on the foundation, but even that is not really a popular read by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, it's really aimed at people inside baseball there, and there's just nothing out there. And I think if you can foster a climate of openness and get academics more and more interested in this area, so you have lots of papers being written showing, seriously analysing successes and failures. You can build up a library of cases like Harvard Business School has around business. Then, when the politicians start going after the money, you can then bring out a whole load of academics who will say, well, this is crazy, you're killing this fantastic institution if you do that. And I think there needs to be, again, an effort by the leadership of the foundation and philanthropic sector to actually foster that serious academic body of knowledge.
I think that's right, and I think we underestimate the public, and occasionally we even underestimate Congress. Not often, but sometimes. Because I found in politics, nobody's perfect. You can be a governor, a president, or what have you, and you make mistakes. And I found out the best way of handling those was to come out in a press conference, and the press asks you the leading question, and you say, I screwed up. I made a mistake. And let's go on. That ends the discussion. It's when you try to apologize or cover up or this kind of thing that you get into trouble. I think foundations the same way. You make a mistake, let's get it out there. Let's say, hey, we made a mistake. This is what we learned from it. And the other things, by the way, is I think foundations, I love the idea that you're encouraging foundations in New Jersey now to work together. We've been doing that a lot at both Robert Wood Johnson and Carnegie. Vartan Gregorian's been a leader nationally in trying to get together Gates and Rockefeller and a number of the big foundations to work together on problems. And that's not easy, because internally foundations are very proud of what they do, and staff's very proud of what they do, and they want it to be the Robert Wood Johnson program or the Carnegie program or the Rockefeller program or the Gates program. And I found this out in government too. The easiest way to get things done is let somebody else have the credit. And if it's doggone it, if it's a program where Rockefeller is taking the lead and it's something that's our interest in Carnegie to accomplish, then Carnegie should be giving some of the money and let it be the Rockefeller program. Who cares? As long as that's worked out. And I think with that kind of feeling that, you let somebody get the credit, that foundations can combine. There's been a lot of money wasted over the years in foundations because they've done exactly the same, tried to do exactly the same thing without talking to each other. And so talk to each other, combine, and if the staffs can do it, a very hard thing for us, hard for a staff or a board, to say, occasionally let somebody else get the credit, and we're just happy we've been in there helping out.
Yes, as I think foundations have become much better at collaborating at all levels, and I think smaller foundations, and again the example in New Jersey is a good one, can do it at a local level as well by getting together and focusing. But I think success and failure are never as cut and dried in philanthropy, given the kinds of issues philanthropy is focused on, and given the many other actors around the same issues, government and others. So success and failure is not always clear-cut, and the evaluations that go on and what is made of that is often, I think, too subtle, even for foundations to understand, is this a failure, is it a success? Maybe we have to wait another 20 years.
Yeah, that's true, but
yes.
there are clear-cut failures.
Oh, okay.
And there are clear-cut successes, and those are the
Over
ones
time.
the ones where it's difficult. It's difficult, and you can't do that very easily. You evaluate it internally, but you probably aren't going to put that out because it's subtle. But I've seen foundations I've been involved with. For the best of intentions, we've made some mistakes.
Yeah.
So you learn from them and go on. And in other cases, we've had incredible successes, and we should learn from that too. And why were we a success? And let's publicize when we do. I mean, we wouldn't have public broadcasting without Carnegie. I mean, let's talk about why that happened and how you did that. And I was involved with a cause to prevent teen pregnancy.
Yes.
And our committee happened to get help. We got help from Carnegie, Johnson, and some others, without which we wouldn't have been able to get going. We had our crises where at one point there was one grant. If we hadn't gotten that grant, the executive director said, we're just going to give up. Because we can't do it. And the result, though, is that particular cause is now the study of the Harvard Business School of how somebody can do it properly. And that's looked at as a tremendous success. Teen pregnancy rate went down 1/3. It's not necessarily what this committee did. We had a lot of help, but this committee had a big part of it. And the foundation world was there at a time government wouldn't and couldn't be. And if the foundation world hadn't been there, I suspect the teen pregnancy rate would still be a lot higher.
Well, I'm hearing that there's a fair amount of agreement here that philanthropy is a very important partner and maybe could become a larger one to government and even the business sector to solving problems that the society faces, not just social problems, but bringing out, improving government, improving corporate responsibility and those kinds of things as well. Given that, when you're sitting on the foundation side of the table, which is where most of us are, I think, here today, what kind of advice would you give the foundations in terms of where they might best place their resources, how they might best use them?
First, I can't say where they should use their resources, but be clear as to where you want to use your resources. I would, this is just me, I would rather get a couple of specific goals for a foundation and say these are the kind of fields we want to work in, rather than sort of spreading over too many of them. Because if you get just a couple of them, you can understand those fields better, you can see the impact of your money better, you can probably follow it better, and all of that. But I can't, there are so many, there are things screaming out in this country, in this state, for help. And you start off with the arts. I mean, the arts, government's cutting back in the arts, business is cutting back with the arts. We're in impoverished society if we lose the arts. So foundations in that area, very, very important. I mentioned, I'm a former college president of a small college with not a large endowment. We are continually struggling at that place, or were when I was there, to find enough money to make sure that poor kids who ordinarily would not be able to get a college education can get it. And so as opposed to some of the rich places, every dollar that we got in that area so we could enable another student to go to college was very, very special. And we saw these students sometimes have tremendous successes on full scholarships that we couldn't have given except some foundation here or somebody gave us the money to do it. And I could go on in so many other areas. I mean, the problems in the cities that I know well, this city, Newark, working with Cory Booker, I'm going to philanthropic meeting later this week in New York where, with Cory Booker, and we're trying to get a New York foundation is already helping to help even more in the Newark schools that need help desperately. And it's just, you ask what should foundations be doing? There's so much, that foundations could be doing. The whole environmental area, so much.
I guess partly what I'm aiming for here is there are so many possibilities. And increasingly, foundations are thinking that they should focus on one or two in order to have a real impact. How do you choose? I mean, it leaves a lot of others behind, and I guess we do have a number of nonprofits in the audience today, and from their perspective, they're sitting there saying, make it mine, make it my issue.
Yeah.
I think that's...
I was going to say, so was I. I mean, I came from a college presidency where for 15 years I had my hand out to you all, and now it's wonderful. People used to cross the street when saw me coming. Now come back across the street to talk to me.
Exactly.
But it's no. Your point is well taken. And there are so many needs. My only answer is again to decide.
And you think that the planning and the thoughtfulness that a foundation decides which area it goes into makes the difference, and that's probably a good message.
Yeah.
That is, to just do it because it's there is less helpful than to really decide that there's a reason you want to do this particular project.
I'm very struck by this. If you look at the one phrase that's really been used about all these new philanthropists more than any other, it's venture philanthropy. And I think it's a phrase that was actually invented by Rockefeller in the 1970s, but nonetheless it's been taken up in most of the writing about this new philanthropy. But I think it's not really very seriously been deployed in practice, that people haven't really rigorously worked the metaphor into the philanthropic sector. I think that's a great shame, and I think one thing I would urge people to do is to look at the venture capital industry and try and think through a number of lessons from that industry, how they might apply to philanthropy. And one is the risk and failure point that we've already talked about. I mean, as a venture capitalist, you are proud to say, I have this 6 of my 10 investments will fail, 3 will probably make some money, and 1 will just become this next Google. I mean, that's your operating method, which is precisely, I think, the sort of attitude that philanthropists ought to have, that's the kind of failure to success rate. The next idea is this notion that actually you're trying to build organizations that are going to have a life well beyond your engagement with them. And so you really think about how do you build up a management team, how do you build up the right internal processes, good governance, good systems. So how are you actually building this organization, this social entrepreneurship organization that's going to be able to grow up to a scale well beyond anything that it seems conceivable now? How do you create a kind of Google of the social entrepreneurship world? And I think that's the one complaint I hear more than anything else from social entrepreneurs, is that there's just no appetite from most foundations to invest in what might be called overhead. But I think in the for-profit world, you call capacity building and human capital and organizational strength. And so that would be another area. And I think the third is this notion, actually, that you want to create a Google. And I mean, that isn't, I think, entirely the case always in the philanthropic world, because sometimes you just want the idea to be broadly accepted. And if the idea is capable of being delivered by thousands of small organizations around the world, and that's the most effective way, then you're happy with that, whereas a venture capitalist would not be happy with that particular model. They want to create only hugely valuable companies like Google. But nonetheless, I do think you want to, I think an attitude that says, let's build an organization that's just going to be so much better than everyone else. It's going to hire all the best people in the field. It's just going to deliver a social solution in a way that no one else can match. That attitude seems to be absent, I think, from the philanthropic world. Even a Gates, I think, feels, I don't really want to upset the pay structures in the non-profit world too much. which he would never think that attitude when he was running Microsoft. He'd say, if I want that person because they're the best, I'm going to pay whatever it takes to get them or offer whatever conditions they need to get. So I kind of want to see more of those attitudes in the philanthropic world. The other area I think is to look at, I think that the whole information technology revolution, the internet and so forth, has very interesting economics, which are that there's some quite high initial costs, but then sort of zero marginal costs of going to scale. And I think foundations actually should be spending much more effort thinking about, can they use this new technology to get messages out to a very large audience? And it means quite high upfront investment and maybe a sense that you may produce nothing, you may get a failure. But if you succeed, the potential then to scale up very quickly is very high, and you can really alter, given we're in a battle of ideas often, and it's about what are the right policies and so forth, you can actually make a huge difference if you can crack the internet and mobility. And I think, Google is beginning to start to do this through its foundation, but they have one operation that they've set up that is about helping people in developing countries hold their own government services to account by providing much more transparency about performance of government services, so that the public will then be able to say, well, this is terrible, why aren't you doing something about it, to politicians. But I think there are all sorts of other ways, and I guess the developing world in general, probably there's a lot more opportunity to get bang for your buck there than in a fairly developed civil society like America.
No, I think you couldn't agree with you more on every point. Let me elaborate on one of them. I find out that when we give grants from major foundations, there's a limit usually to those grants. 3, 4 years, 8 years, whatever it is. Barteng Agorian used to say, we are an incubator, not an oxygen tank. So there's a time at which the foundation grant comes to an end. Very often, you find some of these organizations that have done wonderful work are not prepared for that day, and have not got their internal structures, that their management team isn't in a sense professional, to go out from the foundation and raise money in other ways and get going. And I think one of the things that we've done to some extent at Robert Wood Johnson now, and I think that foundations have got to do more of, is actually getting teams out there to help their grantees set up the kind of infrastructure and the kind of organization so that they're prepared. And some of them are small storefront organizations that are doing a wonderful job in a wretched urban neighborhood, and making a real difference, but they can't continue. And we've got to, I think, as foundations, do more of setting up the kind of infrastructure for those organizations so that if we leave, they're prepared to continue.
Well, I think this is a wonderful place to end with some wonderful thoughts about how foundations can really make a difference in this 21st century. I know that Nina wanted to leave a little time for some questions from the audience.
You wanted to have a little talk?
You've done a wonderful job in beginning to outline what all the challenges are facing foundations today and even tomorrow. But as you have each touched upon models that you think would work for, you've described what would be ideal and optimum ways for foundations to go forward. But what's the tipping point? How can we actually get that accomplished? There are examples of foundations that are leading the way, but there are so many others. What needs to be done to bring everybody together, like what we're doing here in New Jersey together? What has to happen?
To bring people together? Well, I mean, you've got to have an organization like you.
Yes, just and I didn't hear him.
No, I presume that's the answer, is just to get together and talk to one another. That's the answer in any field, really. I think the more ideas are exchanged, you can go home and disagree with those ideas, but you need to get them.
Is there, to build on that though, I think of what are the message points, that tipping point, as colleagues speak, clearly it's peer-to-peer and colleague to colleague, but what are those messages that do you have any thoughts on that, that can help bring others along? The things that would matter to philanthropies that, that we might have.
Well, I mean, I think actually the process is underway. I mean, I think this is one of the things that's happened over the last decade, particularly the last 5 years, as there's been more and more momentum behind, the high-profile, I'm being attacked by a fly. High-profile donors. That they've actually, I mean, someone like Warren Buffett giving away his fortune that way, the fact that the Google guys so young in their career have become philanthropists, it's all creating a lot of media attention. So The Economist, I don't think anyone really wrote very much about philanthropy 10 years ago. The first time I can really recall a piece in the paper was in '97, when Ted Turner made his donation, saying, well, when's Bill Gates going to start giving away some money? He seems very tight. Fortunately, he reads The Economist. I'm not sure we had any impact, but now, it's the sort of thing that I can devote a significant amount of my time to writing about, and I'm not writing enough for my editors about this, and they want me to write more. And other journalists are now seeing this as a part of your. This is actually quite an interesting area to write about. So the New York Times has a philanthropy issue in its magazine once a year. I think Vanity Fair is bringing out a big philanthropy issue later in the year. So this has become a subject that the media is getting more interested in. I still think there's a lack of, there isn't the kind of website that I think really does a serious job with this. There isn't a, I mean, the Chronicle of Philanthropy is obviously very good, but I'm not sure it's the whole answer. And you could imagine more publications coming in and filling this space over the next few years as the sector grows. So I think there's a debate going on, and I think the more debate there is, the more reporting on this, the more academics feel this is a career path they want to take, the more foundations open up about what they're doing and embrace that, the more there's going to be learning and messages that you can share with each other. So, but I do think that process is now well advanced. If you look back 10 years ago, it was hardly there at all.
But it's a common, it's a methodology, it's selection of topics, it's the way you do it. It's not any way a commonality of purpose as to what you want to fund. Because I remember a discussion years ago, we were talking about what philanthropies should fund, and the then president of the University of Chicago spoke up and said, if I was starting a philanthropy today, I think I would fund whatever society is neglecting that is very important. And she said, in my view, it's now the classics. If I was starting a foundation, that's what I'd fund.
Well, it's like the widow of McDonald's founder gave all that money to poetry, which means we've been having a revival of the iambic pentameter or something. It's fantastic.
God bless her.
I think that is important, but I think also, I mean, one of the things the media needs to be encouraged to do, though, is to, I mean, so far we've gone down here's a big number, someone said they're going to give away. Not a lot of follow-up, how much are they actually given away? But, so the Clinton initiative is wonderful for promising large amounts of money, but not necessarily who follows up on that. But the other issues, the press has got quite interested in scandals, like the guy who gave himself a pay rise to pay for his daughter's wedding and things like that. And so those make great newspaper stories. I think the need is to move the foundation sector can make is to push the media towards analysing impact and the seriousness of successes and failures. And I think there will be an appetite in the media to do that, but it's still going to take a bit of leadership from the sector to kind of help provide us with stories that are interesting, that we can sell to our editors.
Well, the press is more interested. I mean, I was quite pleased when Robert Wood Johnson decided to invest $500 million in the prevention of child obesity. Times put it in the front page, and a lot of the other newspapers in the country covered it. I mean, that was one of the first times that I've ever seen, other than a huge Gates initiative or something, a foundation set a target and set a goal and say how they're going to get there, and have the press really pay a lot of attention. I think that's encouraging.
We're actually very fortunate in New Jersey that there's I believe we have one paper, I think it's only one, but that there is a column dedicated to covering the social sector. The Bergen Record has that, where we get coverage of news events that would happen with that, but that there's a consistent column that covers it that way. Other questions? Michael?
Well, the Governor, Mr. Bishop, has given us some great examples of things that some of the foundations are doing to really be leaders. So I'm wondering if you could offer us your advice on things that a typical foundation could either do or stop doing in order to make themselves more effective. Most of the institutions are not, for example, with Johnson's and Carnegie foundations are rather small. But from your perspective, what kind of things are they doing that keep them from being effective, or what could they start doing to make them more effective?
So, I mean, I know a lot of you in this room, and you are tremendously effective. I mean, you picked your area, you're working in an area, and you're doing it well, and making a difference, making a big difference. I suppose if you're doing the wrong things, I mean, if you're a foundation that you've just started and you're paying yourself a huge salary and you're gonna, that kind of thing, I'd stop doing that. I mean, but I mean, I think most foundations, of the ones I know in this room, are doing it right. I mean, actually doing it right.
Yeah, I think to me, I think the opportunity lies in maybe finding some bigger foundations that are willing to provide the sort of infrastructure to other smaller foundations that help them be much more efficient. So, I wish there would be that enabling role played by those that have the money to provide low-cost accounting and software and training to use the software that just makes administration much less of a problem. Because I mean, it seems to me that both for small social entrepreneurs and charities and for small foundations, the administrative costs and burden take up far too much time, and compared with the actual going out and doing the work that you feel called to do. So that's, I think, where others can help. But it's very hard for a foundation to do that because if the infrastructure isn't available to use.
This calls to mind Andrew Carnegie's business philosophy, which was put all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket. But interestingly, that was not his philanthropic philosophy. He did everything from working on alternate spelling to trying to have world peace. And I think the challenge for foundations of today, particularly smaller ones, is do you try to do a lot of different things and have some impact on all of them, or do you focus? And I guess I regret to some extent the current lectures that we all give about really focusing in on something that you can bring all of your resources to bear on and let somebody else do the rest. It seems to me that in certain communities and in certain places where the resources are limited, there's an advantage to looking across the community at the kinds of issues that need to be done. But and to help fund them all. But not everyone agrees with me on that.
Well, it's this difference between focus and silos, isn't it? I think everyone's against silos, but in favor of focus. So,
And what's the difference?
well, I mean, that's a very good question. It may well depend on. I think the notion of silos is that you're doing something because that's what you've been told to do in some sense, rather than that you're looking at the big picture. So I think you can focus with it by you can look at the big picture and then focus in on one part of it. Whereas the silo thing is that you just keep doing it because that's your program and that's what you've decided to do, and you don't ask yourself the question, is this actually what I should be doing? And so I think if you're looking at a community, you can say, well, at this moment in time, we want to really focus on this thing, but let's keep an open mind that maybe the community's needs will change over time, and that we should not say that we're particular experts in sort of under 5 education or something, but that actually we're an expert in that community, and we'll finding the leverage points, the needy points at any particular moment in time, and shifting across as the needs change.
And Andrew Carnegie, if you take his major giving, it was all in the area broadly defined education or world peace. I mean, those are his great, that's what he gave his life to, basically.
And the arts, organ music.
He gave, not organ music.
And the arts.
But generally it's education and the arts.
Yes.
And the, and there are needs all, if you're running a foundation, there are going to be needs that jump out at you that are unexpected in a community. Paper Mill Playhouse may go out of business, you know? That's a big loss if the Paper Mill Playhouse goes out of business, and people have invested money in that for years and to keep it going. And so, you know, maybe this year you divert something to make sure that there's a plan to keep that theater going if possible. Or something else, or some need that jumps out at you. And I think if you're a foundation, you've got to be, even if it's a little off your course, but you've got to be open to those needs and aware of the fact that if you...
Well, I think we have a number of community foundations in the audience, and I think in many places, they basically have the mandate to look out for the whole community, and they often collaborate with other of the foundations or of the philanthropists to help see the big picture. So maybe that's part of the problem, and it's the associations also provide this in communities to bring people together and not divvy up the problems, but to try to figure out how they can impact all of them one way or another.
It's one of the aspects with New Jersey Together that we're
Yes.
focusing on
Yes.
for that way.
And we'll come
I
back
think
to
I'm
that.
very conscious of our time, and I think we have time for one more question up at the top there. John.
I think that's a wonderful point. I think there are a lot of ways we can see things together. At Carnegie, I know that's part of the new vision at Carnegie is that everybody talks to everybody else. Everybody's aware of everybody else's programs and everybody else is helping. And you find a lot of cross-references. And there's no question you're right. And I think that's the idea of, that you mentioned, breaking down silos. Because there are a lot of these cross-references, and there are a lot of ways one thing can go with another, and we find health in the arts, more and more we find that out. You know, we find out that one of the ways to bring Alzheimer's patients back, at least a bit, is through music. I mean, that kind of cross-reference is important.
I mean, I know the story, the saying is about philanthropy, that when you become a philanthropist, you've had your last bad meal and you've told your last unfunny joke. And I mean, I think one of the biggest issues is that you have this power imbalance between, you know, those that have the money and those that want the money. And how you create an honest dialogue in that environment, I think, is the overriding challenge for this whole sector. And it's going to require leadership from the foundation sector because I think they're the ones with the power. And so they have to figure out ways that they can actually demonstrate to those who they're working with that they want honest dialogue and partnership rather than...
Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. This was really wonderful. What a rich discussion. When we first started talking about this a year ago, it's been wonderful. It's just what we had hoped for. So thank you all very, very much. Just have a couple of notes. Our hope now is that over lunch, you'll build on what you've heard and engage in some small group discussions using the scenario outlined in the program as a guide. We tried to incorporate some of the concepts that we anticipated in the conversation, and I think we did well, into the scenario exercise, and we purposely went very big picture. We encourage each small group to use it as it sees fit, though. You can take a holistic view, examining the scenario in total, or tease out one or two or even three of the issues or ideas that it raises. In the end, we ask that each table write out for us the one most significant thing that you collectively realized through the discussion. There will be flip charts in each of the two gathering rooms to post these findings, and then next week we'll share these on the council's website. We also hope to have an audio recording of our conversation this morning on our website as well. The scenario draws on issues and trends that are very real and have the potential to shape the work we do and how we do it. It is purposely esoteric, though, but in many respects, we hope you'll agree, it is quite plausible. All of us spend most of our time dealing with practical concerns that call for an immediate response. Taking time to sit back and imagine a bigger future feels like a luxury, I know, particularly in the middle of a workday. This is an opportunity for us to engage each other in a different type of conversation, though, and we really hope that you'll take advantage of it. I want to thank Alcatel-Lucent for sponsoring this aspect of our program and acknowledge Florence Deming, who's here with us today. As you leave today, we have a gift bag for you, thanks to the support of Sanofi Avantis, and it includes some information on the New Brunswick Cultural Center facilities, inside each, as well as a book. But also inside each one of the bags is information on Project Streamline, a national collaborative effort of grant-making and grant-seeking organizations working to improve grant application and reporting practices. The council will be hosting a program on this for our members in December prior to the annual meeting. Now, speaking of the annual meeting, I hope our members will mark their calendars now for December 11th. We'll be gathering at Forsgate Country Club. In wrapping up, I want to again acknowledge our other sponsors for today, PSE&G, our signature sponsor, and Provident Bank Foundation. I must also thank David Gray and his staff of the New Brunswick Cultural Center, and David Saint, Artistic Director here at George Street Playhouse, and his thoughtful, very thorough production crew, led by Chris Bailey and Jacqueline and everyone else who took care of so many of the details for us here at the theater. Lastly, I must acknowledge my amazing team. We brought in some ringers to assist us today, and our intern, Brooke Eder, Jennifer Sankton. You mentioned the Newark Philanthropic Liaison, Matthew. Jeremy Johnson is here with us today. That's a program of the council that has placed the Newark Liaison in City Hall in Newark, working with Mayor Booker. And Jeremy's come in to help us today. We also, and our small but very capable staff, Joan Burkholtz, office manager, and Nina Handler. Ari Kramer, our manager of communications and member services, and our newest employee, Teresa Jacks, who's manager of advancement and special initiatives. So I want to thank my team for that. With all that, I will say on behalf of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, Governor Kane, Matthew Bishop, Sarah Engelhardt, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really so inspiring and thought-provoking, and we really look forward to great thoughts coming out of our small group discussions. So please enjoy your lunch, and thank you again.